Alright, so today I'm going to be talking a little bit about pop art. And pop art is a style of art that's focusing on popular culture as opposed to traditional fine art. So our first artist we're going to look at is Richard Hamilton. Richard Hamilton started off as a draftsman, so he would do technical drawings and originally transitioned into fine arts. And he was actually the originator of pop art and defined what the movement was supposed to be and represent. So in his collage we have here, this lollipop actually is the object that gave pop art its name. So this collage was the first example of pop art, and it's again focusing on kind of the visual representations that are kind of bombarding America at this time through television and print advertising, and kind of elevating that to an art form and exploring that very new sort of deluge of media that's happening at this time. The next artist we're going to talk about is Andy Warhol, who's famous for these tomato soup cans along with some other projects, but he was definitely the biggest household name as a pop artist. Really famous artist, and also associated with a lot of musicians and other artists and all sorts of celebrity types. He was really obsessed with celebrity and kind of exploring celebrity and the images of celebrities as iconographic sort of pieces of visual imagery. So in the same way, the tomato soup can is this thing that's instantly recognizable, has a lot of power as an advertising image. The image of a celebrity represents kind of similar sort of ideas. So there's a lot of exploration of that. Probably most famous for his images of Marilyn Monroe. So he would screen print these, which is a process that allows you to reproduce an image and hand color them. So they're all hand colored, but the initial black image is done with a screen print, which can be laid out over and over again. And that repetition is very characteristic of a lot of his work. And then later on in his career, we see some fascination with other juxtapositions and a lot of work with art history images and religious art. And if we think about kind of Jesus as a representative of kind of this celebrity image, he has kind of a lot of overlap with some of the celebrities' figures. He's very recognizable, and his image is a powerful symbol that kind of spans throughout art in a way that makes an interesting contrast with the way that celebrity images kind of move through popular culture. Our next artist is Roy Lichtenstein. Lichtenstein was an artist who replicated comic panels to create paintings, and he would use even the techniques of printing in a newspaper where he used these tiny little color dots called Ben-Day dots in his painting. And he was really interested in kind of creating a parody of newspaper print, specifically comics, but also kind of in exploring the production methods that were employed by industry in the industrial design world. Next we have Keith Haring. Haring has a very distinctive style that maybe some of you recognize. A lot of his images have been kind of reused for different things. He was heavily influenced by graffiti art and the sort of New York scene at the time. He's also really well known for his social activism, especially in regards to AIDS awareness. Our next artist is David Hockney. Hockney is a British artist who lived in California. He has a wide variety of subject interests and paints all sorts of things and does different sorts of artwork, but he's really well known for these pool paintings. These ones are fairly famous. The first one is Portrait of an Artist, the two figures in the pool. It was, for a time, the most expensive selling painting by a living artist when it sold in 2018 for $90 million. This painting, Bigger Splash, is another work by Hockney that's quite famous. You can see that we have like a simplified sort of flattened advertising design to this. It's kind of influenced by the both advertising and the sort of architectural ideas and concepts of the day, kind of aesthetic of the time it was painted. Moving from painting to sculpture, we have a famous artist named Claes Oldenburg who was primarily known for making these large-scale sculptures of small, everyday objects, kind of recontextualizing where the objects are and what they're doing, and the scale and playing with proportion. So now we're going to move on to contemporary art that has a heavy pop influence. So the first artist we're going to look at is Yayoi Kusama. And she's a woman who is really focused on these polka dots. That's kind of her main trademark here. But she's a installation artist, meaning that she kind of creates spaces primarily, and a lot of them involve the use of these polka dot motifs. So you can see here we have this example. The first one is this room with all these dots everywhere. The second are these wrapped trees and other objects, and then this giant gourd, all with the sort of repeating polka dot motif. Our next artist is another Japanese artist. His name is Takashi Murakami. He was heavily influenced by pop art, but also by traditional and modern sort of Japanese design aesthetic. So if we think about anime and manga and kind of that Hello Kitty design aesthetic, he's really kind of into all of those things. He works in painting, but also in design and fashion and things like that. He associates with a lot of rappers and worked for Billie Eilish on some of her videos and helped with some art direction on that. So he's really interesting and quite famous right now as well, but has that heavy pop influence. His style that he has kind of created in this design aesthetic he's working in is something he calls super flat, which is kind of a combination of traditional Japanese design principles and sort of the modern art that is coming out of that. And it's a blending or sort of playing with high art versus sort of low or more poppy sort of art style. So pop art also had a lot of influence on street art. So there's a couple of street artists we're going to look at. The first one is Banksy. Banksy is a mystery man. Nobody knows who he actually is, but he will pop up every once in a while in cities all over the globe and kind of create artwork. A lot of these are kind of providing a certain level of satire. There were some pieces he did on the Israel-Palestine wall of kind of cracks and splits in the wall. There's also a lot of things in Britain kind of calling out British politicians and whatnot. So a lot of them have kind of a political bent to them, but they are using this sort of advertising language in a lot of these high contrast black and white images. A lot of them will also be sort of installation pieces, so they will interact with the environment where he puts them. There might be an object around or another piece of art that they have some sort of interaction with. Banksy was in the news recently when he sold a piece at auction, and after the bidding was completed, the frame that it was in actually had a built-in paper shredder, and it proceeded to shred the piece at the end of the bidding session. It actually kind of didn't work and got stuck halfway, which is kind of interesting in its own right to have this half-shredded sort of piece of artwork as well. But he's someone who, as much as the art itself, is really into kind of the context of the art and pulling stunts and trying to do witty things and impress people with that kind of stuff. And our final artist is Shepard Fairey, who's also a street artist. He kind of came to prominence running this campaign, this sort of propaganda campaign for Andre the Giant, where he would make these stickers and distribute them and post them all over the place. He'd also do big stencils or wheat pastes of Andre the Giant. And nobody really knew what it meant. It was a very puzzling thing at the time. And when he was kind of found out as being the person behind it, he rose to prominence in that kind of street scene. He later designed the campaign poster for Barack Obama. He kind of did this voluntarily, and it started off being kind of poster for a local event, I think in Denver, I'm not sure though. And it kind of rose to national prominence and being used regularly by the campaign. He actually got into a little bit of legal hot water over this because he used a photo that was taken by an Associated Press member to design the poster. And the copyright for that photo belongs to the press member. So when you're using other people's photography, there's potential for legal issue. There's certain ways you can use that, but there's a lot of gray areas and you can get in trouble. And he actually got himself into the most trouble probably because he destroyed some of the evidence that proved that he had used this photo in creating this piece of artwork. One of the hard things about being a street artist, of course, is that it's difficult to monetize. This wasn't a problem for Shepard Fairey. He eventually parlayed his street art empire into a clothing line called Obey that you might be familiar with. Probably, I don't know, 10 years ago it was pretty popular swag for people to kind of pick up and wear. Kind of the Supreme shirts back maybe 10 years ago. So there we go. That's sort of a brief overview on pop art, a art movement that made a lot of people famous, and a lot of people have been very successful in that kind of style of art, but also continues to have a lot of influence over the modern art world and a lot of the art that's happening right now. So there you go. Hope you learned something. There's a lot more to it. It's very in-depth, but that's kind of a brief little overview. Thanks.